Dehydrators. I'm often asked, why should I buy a dehydrator? Or what kind of dehydrator should I buy? Or even, I've had this dehydrator for a long time. What can I do with that? We'll answer these questions and more today on Indian Preservation. Welcome to Indian Preservation. My name is Cindy Bighorse, and today we're talking about dehydrators. Dehydrating is one of my favorite ways to preserve food. It fits my schedule, it fits my budget, and it doesn't have a lot of restrictive recommendations like other preservation processes. Today, we're going to talk about the science of the process of dehydrating. We'll talk about equipment and tools that you'll need. We'll discuss the best practices, and I'll share with you some of my favorite tips. Dehydrators, episode 11, scene 2, take 1. So exactly what is dehydration? Well, first of all, this is a family-friendly process, so you want to get everyone involved. The kids will enjoy preserving along with you. But dehydration is a method of removing water from your food, and we do that by moving warm air across it. The elimination of water prevents the growth of bacteria and molds and slows down the enzyme activity. And this process will make your food shelf-stable if stored properly for 3 to 5 years. Your food is considered dry when 80 to 95% of the water is removed. But Cindy, you said we're eliminating water from our food, but you follow up with food is dried when 80 to 95% of the water is removed. I don't understand. Well, that's a great question, and I'm so glad you asked that. The water that we removed is called active water, and this is the water that's free to grow microorganisms. The water that's left behind is bound water, and this water combines with salts and sugars that's in your food and acts as a preservative. We also talked about enzyme activities, and enzymes are the proteins in your food that cause your food to mature, and that's where you get your flavor and your color and your texture. And once you hit a certain point, then the enzymes start to decay your food. By preserving food when enzymes are at their peak, you're going to get the best quality product on your shelf. So the process for dehydrating your food is to prepare the food according to the recipe. And I have links in the description box that will show you some reliable sources for finding recipes. You want to arrange your food on your trays. And my granddaughter Zoe's been doing that with me since she was 15 months old. At that time, she was a little OCD and all the food was perfectly arranged. By the time she was 3, we'll just say she had a little artistic flair. And you'll be seeing Zoe again from time to time. Once you have your trays inside of your dehydrator, you'll want to check them every couple of hours and rotate them as necessary. Once your food is dried, remove it, let your food cool to room temperature, and then package it, seal it, and label it. A lot of your recipes will call for a pre-treatment. Sounds kind of scary, but it's not that difficult to do. For vegetables, you will want to blanch them according to the recommended guidelines. And blanching is simply a process of boiling food for a required number of minutes and then plunging it into ice water for that same amount of time, and then drying your food completely and then arranging them on your tray. For your fruits, that's handled a little differently. We're going to acidify some water by adding something like citric acid or a citric juice like lemons or oranges, or even some vitamin C powder, and that will prevent browning. Your thicker skinned fruits like blueberries and grapes and cranberries should be blanched for about 30 seconds. And then you'll want to either slice those fruits in half or poke each one, yes, every one, with a little toothpick so that water and air can release. After your fruit has been on the tray for a couple of hours, you can slide that tray out and you can see which ones you forgot to poke. Trust me, I've done that plenty of times. Herbs, you want to rinse those leafy leaves in cool water, and your woody herbs like rosemary or some of your older thyme of branches, you'll want to blanch those for about 30 seconds. Beef jerky, you'll want to use very lean pieces of meat. Remove all visible fat, and then make sure your pieces of meat are thinly and evenly sliced. So you've done all this work. Your food is dry. What do you do with it? You did tell us that that food is good for 3 to 5 years. Well, you're going to store this. What I like to do for long-term storage is to vacuum seal in jars or in vacuum seal bags. Freezer bags and jars with lids like this are great for short-term storage, things that I use on a daily basis. You want to store your products between 50 and 70 degrees out of direct sunlight. If you have food with some fat content like your beef jerkies, that's usually shelf stable for about 3 months. You'll want to put those in the freezer. They'll be good for about a year. Fruit leathers and other high sugar fruits, they're also good for about 3 or 4 months on the shelf. Those will be fine for over a year stored in your refrigerator. So now you have all this beautiful product on your shelf, and it's time to do something with it. But keep in mind, when you're reconstituting your product, you want to be able to use the same water temperature as your use. So if you're making a salad, you'll want to rehydrate your carrots and cabbage in cool water. It may not be completely rehydrated after 2 hours, so just let it sit in the refrigerator. Make sure you plan for that extra time. It may take overnight for large and dense chunks to rehydrate. If you're going to be using as a fresh product in a casserole, you want to gradually add warm water so your food absorbs that water instead of the water absorbing the color and nutrients out of your food. I like to microwave those items for about 10 or 15 seconds so it opens up the pores and it takes the water on better. Or if you're going to cook it, like in soups and stews, just take a handful of peas or carrots or potatoes and just throw that into your pot, and it will rehydrate by the time your meal is finished. So let's talk a little bit about equipment. Obviously, what you're going to have is a dehydrator. I also recommend a very sharp, high-quality stainless steel knife. And the reason you want a good stainless steel is because when you slice things like bananas and apples and peaches and your light-colored fruits, even with an acid wash, they don't have a tendency to brown as much. You'll also want a very clean cutting board and some jars or other packaging to put your produce in. I like to use canning jars, but you can use things like leftover pickle jars or something like that. But I would reuse my old canning lids and these little adapters, and I get these from Food Saver, so you can vacuum seal your jars. That helps you keep your food fresh for about 3 to 5 years. Other things that are useful is if you want to slice your product, your vegetables and fruits, things like carrots and potatoes, I find that a food processor or a mandolin with slicing or shredding blades are very useful to help keep your food pieces uniform in size. If you like to dice and chop up your vegetables, this little 4-in-1 chop and slice appliance is great. It makes real quick work of chopping up your food. I find the challenge is to make sure you get your fingers out of the way before you close the lid. If you're going to be making beef jerky or venison jerky, I recommend a meat slicer. Again, uniform thicknesses is essential for a successful dehydrating. If you don't have a meat slicer, talk to your local butcher. They'll often provide that service for free. Fruit leathers and fruit powders, vegetable powders are great to have on hand. You'll need a blender or a food processor for those to puree that. You'll also need some fruit leather trays to dry those liquids on because it's going to fall through the mat. And each of your dehydrators, the different models and styles come with their own unique style of fruit leather trays. You see, I have rectangular ones and round ones. And last of all, to make those powders that I was talking about, you'll want a dedicated spice grinder. I just bought an old coffee grinder, and that's used only for spices, not for coffee. That spice grinder, that fine powder gets caught all over in the lid and on the little cracks on your spice grinder. The easiest way to clean that is run a handful of rice through the grinder and grind that into a fine powder. I like using electric dehydrators because it provides an environment with controlled temperature and consistent heat. It produces dry air to pull the moisture away from your food, and that air circulating also helps with that. One of the bonus features that you get by using an electric dehydrator is that it's a contained area. You see, I have an aunt that lives in South Texas, and she's in her 70s, and she learned how to dehydrate from her mother. Every summer, she removes the window screens and she scrubs them, and she lays them on the picnic table, and she arranges all of her fruits and vegetables, and then she covers that with a second screen. She also has a nephew that hunts, and he has venison roast sliced for her, and she pulls that out of the freezer at the same time, and then she hangs those little pieces of meat on her clothesline. Now, she's done this for years, and she's just fine with it, but for me, I don't want dust and bugs and birds or even cats and dogs enjoying my produce. To buy a dehydrator now? Well, first of all, if you already have a dehydrator, don't go out and buy a new one. The one that you have will work just fine. But my recommendations for somebody purchasing a dehydrator is that you want a dehydrator that has an adjustable temperature range from 95 to 165 degrees. This allows you to dry everything from herbs to jerkies. The fan should be located on the top of the unit or on the back of the unit. This provides even drying. Your tray should be equipped with food grade mesh. The unit should be closed in like these. And most importantly, that system should be UL approved. And this will help reduce the chance of fire in your home. And you can find that UL seal or standard on the labels on your unit, or even printed on the outside of the box that it comes in. What I don't recommend is a bunch of bells and whistles, because you're paying a lot of money for something that you really don't need. I mean, they're fine to have, don't worry about that, but digital displays have a tendency to fail quicker than these little analog switches. And timers, well, my dehydrator sits in a different room, so I set my phone for a timer because I'm not going to hear that little bell ding on my dehydrator on the other part of the house. And delay starts, like we talked about earlier, you really don't want your food sitting out for more than a couple of hours because you're going to start introducing bacteria. So if you want to, go ahead and invest in those little extras, but that's going to run you an extra $50 to $150 per unit. There are two types of dehydrators on the market. There's a stack and a shelf. This is a stack system, and I like this because you can add trays as you go along. Most of your dehydrators will take up to 12 trays, and I've seen a few that take 36, but the reviews that I've read said 12 is about the maximum that you can successfully dehydrate food. What I like about this particular unit is that you have these trays, and you have about 3/4 of an inch lip on here that holds the food in, whether it's fresh or after it's dried. If you move too quickly, your dried food's just going to fly all over the kitchen. It has a much smaller footprint. It's a lot easier to clean, and the controls are right here on the front. Easy to access when it's sitting on your kitchen counter. What I don't like about these types of unit is that you have a fixed space between each shelf. So when I'm dehydrating spinach, I have to lay each leaf on a single layer. The mesh on here is radial, so I have a smaller mesh here in the middle and a much larger hole on the outside. Your food, when it starts to dry, has a tendency to fall through these little holes. That makes a problem. So you need to purchase additional food grade mats for these trays so they work more efficiently. It's necessary to rotate these shelves a lot more often because the air is coming up through the sides and down through the center, or opposite depending on the model. So your food doesn't dry nearly as fast. And this particular unit has the motor on the bottom. Every time I use it, I have to clean the base, I have to clean the motor area because food particles and moisture falls into this, and I don't want to ruin my unit. This is a stack dehydrator, and I like this because when I'm drying things, I can remove trays and I can have more space between the trays. The trays have a smaller mesh, and as you can see here, and I like this because it's flexible and you can use it as a funnel to empty into your jars. These mesh have two different sides. One side's real bumpy and the other side is real smooth. That is very helpful when you're trying to dry sticky foods. I like to put it on the bumpy side, and dry foods like potatoes and carrots, I put that on the smooth side. It just makes it a lot easier to remove. This is a multitasker. I can remove all of these trays and I can make yogurt in this, or I can proof bread. The fan is located at the back of this unit, which allows the air to flow across the tray, drying your food faster. What I don't like about this machine is that it has a maximum number of trays. And at harvest season, I have to run my unit a lot more often because I can't put any more food in here. I'm kind of happy I've got the backup. Sugary foods have a tendency to stick to this tray, and sometimes it's a bit of a challenge to remove. This unit's a lot more difficult to clean because you have to reach way in the back to clean the shelf and around the fan box. The controls are in the back of this unit, and I understand the newer models have moved them up to the front. This is a 10-year-old machine. It's served me very well, and it's still working strong, so that's a good thing. The other thing I don't like is that these trays have no lips. So food has a tendency to roll off or blow off if I move too fast or tip the tray a little bit. You want to watch that. Now that you know the features, good and bad, for both types of units, which machine will you pick? So to have a successful product, it's always best to apply a few best practices. The first thing I do is I preheat my oven or my dehydrator just before I start loading my trays. You want to make sure you cut your fruit and vegetables into uniform thicknesses. That ensures that everything will dry evenly and finish at the same time. I don't mind mixing foods that are going to dry at the same temperature, but you want to avoid trying to dry anything with onions and garlics and, especially mushrooms. Those smell really bad when they're drying, and that smell will kind of permeate your foods. You probably don't want apples that smell like mushrooms or even taste like mushrooms. I try to load my wetter foods when I start at the bottom of the unit. That way the moisture, when it drips, it doesn't drip onto your food. Keep in mind, when you're dehydrating, if you're drying herbs, you want to dry them at about 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Vegetables at 125, fruits around 135 Fahrenheit, and meat at 165. You want to dry meat at that higher temperature to kill any parasites and bacteria. We've talked quite a bit today about dehydrators and the process, but I want to share with you some of my favorite tips. Keep in mind that your food begins to cook at 115 degrees Fahrenheit. So when I have delicate vegetables like spinach and kale or leafy herbs, I like to drop those temperatures a little bit. So instead of 110 for my herbs, I usually drop it to 100 or 95 degrees. Vegetables at 125, I like to drop that to about 110. That helps retain that beautiful green color. I found that if I cook them at the recommended temperature, that the colors look scorched and the flavor has a little bit of a burnt taste to it. Not very appealing to me. My favorite thing to do is buy them and dry them. When you dehydrate vegetables, you need to blanch them. When you freeze vegetables, you need to blanch them. So why not buy your favorite frozen vegetables from the grocery store, especially when they're on sale, and just put one package per tray, about 1 pound package at a time. And just shake off the little ice crystals, or you can hit it with the little sprayer from your kitchen sink and shake off the excess water and put that in your dehydrator. The preparation work is already done for you. I also put my dehydrator in a non-traffic area of my home. They run for several hours, anywhere from 8 to 12 hours for your produce. You know, herbs are a lot shorter, but that noise and the smell can be very annoying to your family. When you dry fruits and vegetables and they don't rehydrate well, don't throw it away. Put it in your spice grinder, make a powder out of it. My husband doesn't particularly care for celery, but celery makes a great powder. You can add that flavor to the food without having that texture to deal with. Don't flood your foods with water. We talked about that a few minutes ago. Just add enough water so the food absorbs the water. If you're adding fruits and vegetables to your cooked items, add a little extra water so your food doesn't come out too dry. Use bouillon, beef or vegetable, or any sort of juice for added flavor to your dehydrated items. Keep a journal of your projects. I also like to dry leftovers. I'll put single serving portions on each tray. Things like spaghetti and meat sauce dry well, and it makes a quick meal. Just add some boiling water. Same thing with refried beans and Spanish rice. Taco meat and chili dehydrate very well. Leftover rice, pasta, mashed potatoes. If you're someone who likes to backpack, hike, camp, this is a great way to take food with you and not have to worry about lugging around heavy ice chests and trying to keep food cool for several days. Now, for those of you who do sourdough breads, instead of throwing your discard away, I put that on my fruit leather trays and I dehydrate my sourdough starter. I'll crumble it up, put it in a jar, and when I'm ready to share or make new sourdough, I add water to it, feed it for 3 or 4 days, and it's ready to go again. And last but not least, kids' birthday parties. I make a basic granola mix and I set dried fruits, assortment of nuts, and a couple little pieces of candy like chocolate chips. And I'll let the guests mix their own customized, personalized granola mix. And kids love it, and it's a lot healthier than cake and ice cream. So have fun, experiment, get together with the kids, and enjoy dehydration.
Thank you for watching Indian Preservation. Make sure to subscribe, click the bell, and comment down below. Bye!